Very good evening and a warm welcome to all the faculty members and experts over here. This is Amit Rajput. I am from Roche India marketing team. Welcome you all for this webinar guided by Dr. Ashish Kaushal. So just a few words about we as an organization that our long-term vision and the vision which we aspire for is to inspire the people to transform healthcare system in India and for every patient's life by providing innovations and sustainable solution at a very good access points. So if you look at we as Roche as an organization which is present more than 150 countries, and it is in service for the patients in 1896. So it's been more than 125 years of the service to the patients. It's a world's leading healthcare company in diagnostic and pharmaceuticals based in Basel, Switzerland. And I'll not go into the figures and all, but let me tell you that in India, if you see, we as an organization is very much poised to change and transform the healthcare system and to improve the access and provide all our Roche innovation products at a very good access point as well as the affordable point as well to all the cancer patients. So just a bit of about today's agenda, which is on the management of ALK positive NSCLC as well as extended stage SCLC topic, which is, and thank you Dr. Ashish Kaushal sir for guiding us for and maneuvering the entire program setup. Before you take over, I would just like to welcome once again to Dr. Rishabh Kothari, who is our first speaker, followed by Dr. Rahul Jaiswal, Dr. Archit Joshi, Dr. Akash Shah, Dr. Ankit Patel, Dr. Hani Parak, who will be esteemed panelist. And for a second panel, Dr. Kaushal Patel, Dr. Nirali Trivedi, Dr. Priyanka Patel, Dr. Aditi Thanki, and Dr. Ekta Wala. I welcome you all the panelists once again and the experts over here. And now I would like to invite Dr. Ashish Kaushal sir for the further proceedings. As sir don't like him to be introduced much, so I'll not go into the details. But Dr. Ashish Kaushal sir,
everybody is Gujarati.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So over to you, sir, for the rest of the evening.
So thank you, Amit. First of all, I would like to thanks to everyone for the login and for this virtual platform, and all the faculty, panelists, and the delegate which is participating in this live webinar. And thanks to the Roche for organizing and helping for this event. Today we have chosen the two very important topics in the management of lung cancer. One is the ALK positive patient, and the second one is the extensive stage small cell cancer of the lung. In our last session, we have discussed about the driver mutant as well as the patient where the first line immunotherapy options are being discussed in the patient of non-small cell lung cancer. So today we have two sessions. The first session would be on the ALK positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, where the first speaker is Dr. Rishabh, as Amit was mentioned, is elective in the management of the first line ALK positive non-small cell lung cancer. And after that, we have a panel discussion on the same category of the patient of ALK positive first line management of non-small cell lung cancer. And the second session, we have, because as we have a lot of newer molecules like immunotherapy has been changed in the management of non-small cell lung cancer. So we have a recent data of immuno-oncology agents where they have been shown a survival benefit in the combination of the chemotherapy. To address this issue, we have a first talk on the role of atezolizumab in the management of extensive stage small cell lung cancer, and is going to deliver Dr. Pinaki. And the subsequent panel, we have discussion on the management of the first line treatment as well as subsequent line of treatment of the same profile of the patient, that is extended stage small cell lung cancer, and that is going to moderate by Dr. Chintan Shah. So let me begin with inviting our first faculty, Dr. Rishabh Kothari. He's a medical oncologist practicing in Ahmedabad. So Dr. Rishabh, now you can share your screen. And as we know, there's a lot of newer molecules in the management of lung cancer, and especially the ALK. We have a first and second, third generation molecule, and we all know alectinib is one of the potent drugs for this category of the patients. So I think you are going to deliver more light on this particular agent. Over to you, Dr. Rishabh.
Good evening. Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. Can you please share my slide, please? So I will be speaking on role of alectinib in management of ALK positive NSCLC. I will largely concentrate on first line treatment and role of alectinib in first line treatment. Next slide, please. So as we all know that ALK positive NSCLC forms about 4 to 7% population of total lung cancer adenocarcinoma patients or total NSCLC patients, and it varies where from which part of the world this data has been collected. But from India also we have range of 4 to 7% based on different studies. So 4 to 7% is a significant chunk, and as we all know that we have multiple options, multiple TKI for ALK positive lung cancer, and they do have long-term survival because of this TKI. So it is important to know what all options we have. Next slide, please. So ALK positive NSCLC is typically seen in younger patients. Median age is around 52 years rather than 70 years, which is seen in other cancer patients. And in India, this would be a bit younger than 52 also. That is what I feel. It is more common in never or light smoker. It is more common in adenocarcinoma histology. And generally it presents in advanced stage, generally stage 4. And CNS mets are quite common in ALK positive NSCLC at presentation. Male and female prevalence is similar. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, CNS mets is common, is seen in around 30% of the patients at diagnosis. And if we image everyone at diagnosis, around 50% of them will have more than 4 brain lesions on imaging at baseline. Next slide, please. So these are the options. These were the options before alectinib. Chemotherapy initially, where we know that median PFS would be around 7 to 8 months. PEM carbo followed by PEM maintenance, something like that. And then we had first generation TKI, which was crizotinib to start with, where median PFS based on profile trial was around 11 months. And then we had first second generation TKI, which was ceritinib, and median PFS was 16.6 months. Ceritinib had better CNS response rate and CNS PFS compared to crizotinib. So these were the options before the ALEX trial or JALEX trial. Next slide, please. So ALEX trial was first global phase 3 study where alectinib was compared to crizotinib. The initial 2 TKI, crizotinib and ceritinib, both were compared with chemotherapy in their phase 3 trials. Here it is compared with crizotinib. So alectinib is compared with first generation TKI, and alectinib at the dose of 600 milligram BD, crizotinib at the dose of 250 milligram BD. Stage 3B and 4 NSCLC patients were taken. ALK positive disease according to IHC test. Treatment naive patient, ECOG PS 0 to 2. Primary endpoint was PFS, and there were multiple secondary endpoints, including overall survival, and there was a stratification factor of CNS mets. And these drugs were continued until there was disease progression, toxicity, withdrawal, or death. Next slide, please. So in investigator assessed PFS, which was the primary endpoint, PFS was 34.8 months versus 10.9 months in crizotinib. So there was almost 3 times that of first generation TKI. Your PFS increased 3 times. Hazard ratio of 0.43, which is very impressive. Confidence interval 0.32 to 0.58, not near unity anywhere. So alectinib demonstrated longest median PFS of 34.8 months in first line setting, almost tripling of PFS when compared to crizotinib. Next slide, please. And it was seen in both category of patients, patients with CNS mets and patients without CNS mets. So median PFS was 27.7 months versus 7.4 months for someone who is having CNS mets at baseline. And it was 34.8 months versus 14.7 months for someone not having CNS mets at baseline. Hazard ratio of 0.35, confidence interval of 0.22 to 0.56 in patients with CNS mets and hazard ratio of 0.47, confidence interval 0.32 to 0.71 in those not having CNS mets. So PFS benefit was consistent irrespective of CNS mets at baseline. And if you see the subgroup analysis, it was seen in most of the subgroups. The PFS benefit was seen across all the subsets. Next slide, please. So this was key secondary endpoint, 5-year overall survival, which was analyzed. And alectinib first line has more than 60% overall survival rate at 5 years, which was highest for any other ALK positive therapy. So when you see this Kaplan-Meier curve, median overall survival is still not reached with alectinib, while it is 57.4 months with crizotinib. So what is important to know that with crizotinib also it is 57.4 months, and so these patients really have a good chance of survival beyond 4 or 5 years. So we should treat them a bit aggressively than other lung cancer patients. And here the hazard ratio is 0.67, confidence interval 0.46 to 0.98. This data is still, OS is still immature because there were 37% of events in intention to treat population. But it is an important thing to note that at 5 years, around 60% of the patients are alive when they are on alectinib. And median overall survival, even with crizotinib in first line, is 57.4 months. Next slide, please. So now for currently approved first line treatments, chemotherapy, we have median PFS of 7 to 8.1 months, crizotinib 10.9 months, ceritinib 16.6 months, and alectinib 34.8 months. So based on this, in the current guidelines, NCCN and ESMO, alectinib has been selected as the preferred option in NCCN. Next slide, please. And what is also important is sequencing of drugs when you are giving treating patient with ALK positive NSCLC. If you have started with first generation TKI, then still you have a good chance to prolong patient survival with second and third generation TKI. And even pemetrexed carboplatin do well compared to other patients in this subset of patients. So this is schematic diagram of all permutation and combination. And it seems that obviously this is cross comparison trial and PFS just been added to all of this, which is not seen in real world data. But this is something which we can try to simulate and try to achieve in our patients. So the highest overall survival or highest PFS we get with alectinib followed by lorlatinib as of now based on all the trials available. Next slide, please. So once we know that we have a very effective drug, even when compared to another generation TKI, what is more important to know what is the safety signal. So alectinib is quite safe drug. Rather adverse events are lesser than crizotinib, and we don't see that visual disturbances and high rate of nausea, vomiting, which we are diarrhea, vomiting, which we see in crizotinib generally. So significant side effects of alectinib would be transaminitis, raised bilirubin, constipation, and fatigue. The rest all of them are less than 20%. And as most of us have used this drug, we know that it is not very difficult to use. And with crizotinib, compared to crizotinib and ceritinib, even grade 3-4 adverse events are lesser. Next slide, please. So this is what I told that as per guidelines, NCCN and ESMO, first line treatment for ALK positive NSCLC is alectinib, and in NCCN they preferred it over the other drugs. Next slide, please. So alectinib is standard of care in first line treatment patients with ALK positive NSCLC because it has demonstrated better efficacy compared to crizotinib, as in PFS, which was primary endpoint in LX trial and even in JLX trial, is well tolerated and has well manageable safety profile, which is maintained with long-term use. It effectively protects against and treats CNS mets, which is seen in around 30% of the patients at baseline. And its clinical evidence base is more extensive. So we have LX trial, JLX trial, LACM trial, all phase 3 trials, somewhere in Asia and somewhere global. So we have significant data available to assess alectinib. Next slide, please. So we had an update in ESCO 21 for JLX trial. The difference in LX trial and JLX trial was LX trial was a global trial where crossover to alectinib was not allowed, while in JLX trial it was largely in Japanese population, Asian population, and crossover from crizotinib to alectinib was allowed. So JLX trial was something which was more what we do in clinic. So at the end of 5 years, there is no overall survival benefit of first line alectinib versus first line crizotinib. Though median overall survival is not reached in either of the arm at 5 years, but this is what it looks like. Why is it so? Because there is high crossover rate. Around very close to 80% of the patients got alectinib later on after crizotinib. So obviously this is something which is debatable because primary endpoint was PFS and such high crossover rate may not be seen in clinical practice when we see patients in real world. In trial, it is still feasible. So whether all crizotinib patients will get alectinib or at least 4 out of 5 will get alectinib at some point of time. But this gives us a good base to ponder that whether sequencing is more cost effective than best upfront treatment available if there is no change in overall survival, and that too if there is no brain mets at baseline. Is crizotinib followed by the later generation TKI equally efficacious strategy rather than best upfront? Though I remain fan of alectinib because of CNS response rate and huge PFS benefit over crizotinib, but this is something which we should ponder on based on cost effectiveness. Another important thing is that post first line, post crizotinib failure, we have data for alectinib using crizotinib failure patients. ALOE trial where median PFS was around 10 to 11 months. So again, we have data for alectinib in second line post crizotinib. Next slide, please. I think this is the last slide. Thank you. If there is any question, I think Ben will be able to answer.
Thank you, Rishabh. I think you nicely summarized the first line management of ALK positive non-small cell lung cancer. So now we know that we have around 5 molecules for this patient category, and only we have a PFS data. So out of this 5 molecule you mentioned, like alectinib is here as the most commonly used drug. So is there any other criteria like the based on the patient profile, is the patient presented with a CNS metastasis, or is there any toxicity criteria where you can select your treatment option in this category of patient?
So CNS mets is something which is important. If there is CNS mets, I would try to push for alectinib. Even if there is no CNS mets, I will try to push for alectinib, but finance is something which drives the decision most of the time. Except that then from tolerance point of view, I feel alectinib, the challenge is only LFT, some bilirubin rise, but with dose modification when required, I think it is quite manageable. So alectinib is a good drug to give. Only thing is finance, and second CNS meds, then I will try to push for at least ceritinib or alectinib rather than crizotinib.
And what about lorlatinib, which is a very good HR as for the CS metastasis?
Lorlatinib, there is data for first line, but side effect profile and the data which we have, neurocognitive side effect with lorlatinib are significant. I don't have huge experience. I have given it only to one patient which was post-ceritinib failure. So, but based on data, I feel that alectinib is still much safer for first line because it has to be given for a longer period of time. If neurocognitive side effects will come, then quality of life will suffer, and lorlatinib always works in second line. So that is the question which is very similar to what is answered in JLX, whether sequencing is important or you want for best treatment upfront. So best treatment upfront if side effects are really low and quality of life improves, like in osimertinib and alectinib. But if toxicity is significant, I will preserve it for the next.
Okay, great. So I think you have nicely summarized, and I request you to be as a part of the panel. I think we need to move on the panel discussion, and thank you, Dr. Rishabh. So now we have a panel discussion on the same category of the patient, that is the first line management of ALK positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. And I'm going to invite Dr. Rahul Jaiswal. He's a senior medical oncologist practicing HUC Vedanta. So over to you, Rahul. And I request Rishabh to be there in the. And Rahul, you can utilize me anytime if you want. You have a panelist right now, Arshit Shah, Ankit Patel, Hani Parikh, and Naus.
Okay. So, good evening, all.
Yeah, you have to go to full screen.
Is this visible?
It is visible. Go to full screen.
Okay. I think now it is visible to all.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Ashish Bhai, for inviting me for this lecture, and thank you, Rishabh. I think he has almost done the job. He has already told that alectinib is the drug of choice for first-line treatment of ALK-positive metastatic NSCLC. I have a feeling that I am writing a board exam and I have a 30 marks question and I know only one line and I have to stretch it for 30 minutes. So I have to stretch it for 30 minutes that alectinib is the drug of choice. But let's see what we can do in next 30 minutes. Okay. So
I'm going to counter this question. I think alectinib we all know, but I think we have. I hope this panel discussion would be.
Let's see what we can do. So I welcome all my panelists. Dr. Archit is there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Akash is there.
Yeah, Akash is not there. He's doing some periodic emergency.
Okay. So I think Ankit, Hani, and Nahush all are there.
Akash is not there, and Dr. Hani Parikh, you can switch on your video so that Hani and Dr. Archit Joshi.
Hani, Archit, Ankit, Nahush.
And Dr. Rishabh, of course. He's
Dr. Rishabh, yes. So I will start with this case. 52-year-old male, non-smoker male, presented with complaints of chest pain, dyspnea, and diagnosed with metastatic lung adenocarcinoma. So biopsy suggestion of moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. Now, how to proceed? So Archit is there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Archit, how will you go now? It's a stage 4 metastatic lung cancer, so systemic treatment is required, and it is a adenocarcinoma, non-smoker male, 52-year-old. So now the patient has come to you. How will you proceed, and which test will you ask for?
First, I want to know that what are the sites of metastasis.
Okay.
If we have done any PET scan or any metastatic staging workup for this patient.
It's a stage 4 disease, whether it's a PET scan or CT scan, whatever you want. It's a stage 4 disease, and I don't think it will matter much. I have not gone into that because I just want to concentrate on this treatment part.
Okay.
So sure. You can say it's a lung upper lobe mass with a bilateral lung metastasis and few bony metastasis. No liver mets right now.
Okay. So I would like to do molecular testing for this patient. This patient is young, non-smoker, adenocarcinoma. So I would like to do EGFR, ALK, ROS1, PDL1, BRAF, and as per recent guidelines, RET and MET exon 14 skipping mutation also. I would order all these mutations. If okay. possible, complete NGS panel.
Okay. So I think you have summarized all the mutations which are to be done or which need to be done before considering any treatment. Okay. I think you have told all the list: EGFR, ALK, ROS, BRAF, NTRK, MET, RET, and PDL1. Okay. So Nahush, are you there? Is Nahush here?
Rishabh.
Yeah, okay. Yes, Rishabh. So what is the frequency of different mutations in your clinical practice? And out of all this extensive list, how much are practically relevant and in which we are more interested practically?
So clinically and practically, if patient is able to buy that drug or is getting that drug on compassionate basis, then it is relevant. Frequency would be EGFR is most common, obviously. Around 30% of our population would be EGFR positive, around 4 to 7 for ALK, around 2% for ROS, and rest all of the mutation, most of them are around 1 to 2% or less than 1%. KRAS mutation is high, but I don't know whether we still have access to that drug on compassionate basis. So for RET, suppose we have drug available at compassionate basis, so maybe we will be doing it because we can procure it for that patient. So I try to do testing, molecular testing based on what patient is able to get, but NGS would be preferred if finance is not a constraint. I would try to get NGS done because there are so many tests. Reflex individual testing is not possible. Tissue will get depleted.
Yeah. Okay. So that you made a point that tissue will be depleted. So before ordering any test, I make a point that I always talk to pathologists who has reported the blocks, and I ask how much tissue is left, because many of times you need a IHC, then you ask for individual test and then leftover test for NGS. So if tissue is less, then directly we can go for NGS. So what is the practical drawback of NGS is, like, NGS reports generally comes after 2 to 3 weeks. And if you send for individual ALK, ROS and EGFR, then the reports comes within 1 week if you send for IHC or FISH. So that is the only drawback of NGS. Otherwise, if tissue is less, you can go for NGS. My point was, out of all these mutations, practical mutations are, I think, only 2 mutations, EGFR and ALK, because these are the mutations we are seeing mostly, and rest of the mutations are very rare. First, they are difficult to find, and then we have difficulty in finding the patient who can afford all other fancy drugs. So practically for me, may not be for Ashish Bhai, but for me, these are the 2 drugs which are relevant practically, because most of our patients afford for these 2 drugs only. So what is the favorable group for EGFR and ALK mutations? You have already covered, and you have told Rushabh that we all know that females or males, Asian population and non-smoker, middle age non-smoker are very less smoking patients. They are the favorable group. And as you told that 33% are patients having EGFR mutations, general population 3 to 4% having ALK translocation, and 10 to 12% in favorable group. They have ALK translocation. And if you can say that if we 33% of the patient EGFR report will come in the favorable group, and if reports come out to be negative in rest patients, there are 30 to 30% chances of getting ALK positive. So this is what most of the guidelines say, and Devita also said like this. So our patient, 52-year non-smoker female, male, test for EGFR ALK ROS were sent, and suppose all reports came negative and patient not willing for immunotherapy. So how to proceed further? I am sticking to ALK positive, but just I am asking, if patient is not willing for immunotherapy, all reports are negative. So how to proceed further? Dr. Ankit or Dr. Hani?
So they are just joining. But before that, Rahul, I have just make one more important point here, which we are discussing as per the workup. So, the positive value of IHC is much higher compared to the FISH.
Sir, I am coming up. Secret abhi mat kholo yaar.
Okay. So you can till then involve Archit is there.
Sir, aap to picture leak kar de. Okay. So Archit is there.
Yes, sir.
So Archit, now your suspense is already opened. So now how to proceed further? The EGFR ALK ROS are negative. Patient is not willing for immunotherapy. So most of the times we start with chemotherapy. You and me and all of us will start for chemotherapy. Anything else we can do if our patient is from a favorable group?
I could not understand your question. Sorry.
A patient who you think that EGFR or ALK mutation will there are chances of it coming to be positive, like a non-smoker, female, middle-aged, Asian population. You
Is
send
it
the
through NGS panel?
Yes, it not NGS if it is by FISH. Suppose FISH for ALK is negative.
Okay.
FISH for ALK is negative. PCR for EGFR is negative. and FISH for ROS is negative, and patient is not willing for immunotherapy. So most of the times we will go for chemotherapy, right?
Yeah, platinum-based doublet chemotherapy usually.
Okay. Okay. So I am not against chemotherapy. I also start chemotherapy. Everybody of us will start chemotherapy. But the point which I want to highlight, which Ashish Bhai also highlighted, that we all know we have three type of tests for ALK gene rearrangements. One is FISH, that is used to be gold standard. Second thing is IHCA, and third thing is NGS. So now there are lot of papers coming which said that though FISH is the gold standard, but IHC has the highest positive rate, while FISH presented a certain false negative rate. So if we are strongly suspecting EGFR or ALK, and if our ALK has come negative by FISH, because there are many laboratories which are still doing FISH test for ALK gene rearrangements. So if FISH report has come out to be negative, we can start chemotherapy, and we can again go for a IHC based test, or we can go for a NGS based test. So in this study, it was said that IHC had a 94.5% upper limit positivity, same NGS 92.7, and FISH has 82%. So there's 12% patients who can be missed by FISH testing. Similarly, that this study said that concomitant mutation status of ALK gene arrangements and its prognostic impact on patient treated with crizotinib. It was published very recently in 2021 March. So they said that apart from this ALK EML4, FISH will test for ALK EML4 mutation only, this G rearrangements only. There are other ALK translocations also which can be picked by NGS, and there are other mutations which can be picked by NGS in which in future will help to decide whether which our ALK inhibitor agent will work. That is, I think it will take some more years, but by NGS we can have many more information. Like in colon cancer, if there are RAS mutations, we cannot use cetuximab. So gradually we will learn that also. And this is the paper in Oncologist which said that comprehensive genomic profiling identifies a subset of crizotinib responsive ALK rearranged non-small cell lung cancer not detected by FISH. So they said that NGS, they detected some patients in which FISH was negative, and there was clinical benefit of starting ALK inhibitors also. So just one point, if FISH is negative, you are strongly suspecting ALK, go for chemotherapy, but ask for IHC or this NGS panel. So now our patient, suppose the patient turned out to be ALK positive by any method. So what are the options now? So we have 3 generations of ALK inhibitors, we all know. So can any one of you, Akash or Hani, have they joined?
You have Ankit is there.
Okay. Ankit.
Hello.
Yes, Ankit, how are you?
First was fine, Rahul.
Okay. Yes, Ankit, we have discussed that we should confirm a test in which if the patients we are strongly suspecting to be ALK positive or EGFR, if they are not turned out to be positive, we can start chemo and we can reconfirm with other tests. So I was asking what type of ALK inhibitors we do have approved for the ALK translocation patients.
So,
there are 3 types of ALK inhibitors available. First generation, second generation, and third generation. So yes, third. So first generation ALK inhibitors are
Crizalc and
it is Crizalc.
The second is ceritinib, and third brigatinib. Third is ceritinib, brigatinib, and
alectinib and encertinib.
This is available.
And third one is and third generation is lorlatinib. Okay, so right now we are having only 3 available in India. One is crizotinib.
Lorlatinib is 4 at least.
Yeah, lorlatinib
is available now.
Is now available. Okay, so we have crizotinib, ceritinib, alectinib, and lorlatinib. 4 drugs are available. Yes, so brigatinib is not available, and encertinib is also not available. So which ALK inhibitor will you give in first line?
If cost is not a concern, then alectinib. Otherwise, we will start with ceritinib.
Okay. So what is the roughly monthly cost for these therapies?
Because ceritinib now the NATCO is withdrawn, so costing is around 38,000. Alectinib is very much costly, around 3 lakh.
Yes. So alectinib, I think now Roche have given some scheme and it turns around 1.5 lakh per month. They are giving 1 plus 2 months free. So
now they
Electrinib is,
they
are changing every week, every month.
Yes.
So right now it is 1.5 months, 1.5 lakh per month. Electrinib is there. Ceritinib is around 40,000, 35,000, 38,000. 15 days, yes, on 15 days they are giving 15 days free.
Yes.
And Crizotinib also turns out to be same.
Definitely.
They are giving 1 plus 1. So Crizotinib is around
almost
40,
same.
Almost same.
Say
Okay.
Almost same.
Okay. So if cost is not an issue, then you will go with Electinib, and if cost is issue, then you will go with Ceritinib or Crizotinib.
Either of anyone, there is no issue. But personally, Ceritinib.
Yeah, because cost is same in both the drugs, and side effect profile is it different or almost same of both the drugs?
Different. Crizotinib having sometimes CNS issue, diplopia, and something any issue, or any patient having a history of any epilepsy or any architect or whatever, we have to think about the specific side effect result, which is not there. Ceritinib has a different profile. They have most of the time gastritis is a very common issue with Ceritinib than the Crizotinib.
Okay. So your some having poor vision or some visual disturbances problem already.
Some require precise work, diamond worker. We have many diamond worker. Then we have to also think about.
Yes. That is a very practical point. Yes.
Ankit, I think because he is looking for
time. Great. So that is a very good point. So if cost is both same for Ceritinib and Crizotinib, then depending on the side effect profile, we can choose either one of them. So which one is better? If no this side effect profile is same and if cost is same, then which will you choose? Ceritinib or Crizotinib?
Ceritinib, I will.
Okay, because it's a second generation has a better efficacy.
Yes.
Okay. And this Lorlatinib, if your patient is a diamond, not a diamond factory worker, but is a diamond factory owner.
Lorlatinib there is very CNS side effect. So I will still, if data is there, will worried about using first line because there are 70 to 80% cognitive issue with this drug. So brain mets ma to બધું ચાલી જાય patient ને આપણે કહી દઈએ કે it is because of brain mets. But in non-brain mets patient is very difficult to explain the side effect, and if patient having any side effect of memory or anything else, then quality of life is a major issue.
Okay, great point. So Lorlatinib in first line, yes, though it has been approved, but not so much data and side effect profile is there. So if your patient, you have 3 drugs to choose: Ceritinib, Crizotinib, and Alectinib. Any particular condition or subset of the patient in which you will insist for Alectinib?
Patient is doing multiple metastasis.
Okay, I think Achit is there.
Yeah, patients with multiple brain metastasis, definitely, I would offer Alectinib.
Yes, rightly said. As Rushabh also said, that Alectinib has a very high CNS penetration, and both the Crizotinib and Ceritinib, they had less brain penetration. So if brain mets are there, then we can insist or we can little bit pressurize patient to go for Alectinib if cost allows, definitely. And for Lorlatinib, I don't think many of us will agree for the first thing. So now just give you, I will share 5-10 minutes for the just overview, completion of the talk. It was a profile 1014 study in which Crizotinib was on the basis of which it was approved. And we all know that it had a better PFS as compared to chemotherapy arm. So when we were in our DM days or early practice day, then Crizotinib was the only choice. So what now Alectinib is just, at that time it was Crizotinib. Crizotinib was the drug of choice, and it had a better PFS and better response rate as compared to chemotherapy. And as we have already discussed, that Crizotinib has a poor brain penetration, and there are high chances of developing brain metastasis when the patient is on Crizotinib. Similarly for this slide, and we have many mechanisms for resistance of Crizotinib, and that may be a new mutations developing, like in EGFR mutations. There may be overexpression of the ALK rearrangements, and there may be other many factors leading to the Crizotinib resistance. So ASCENT-4 was a trial on which Ceritinib was approved as a first-line therapy, and Ceritinib was then compared to pemetrexed and carboplatin combination. it showed better PFS, and it led to the approval of serotinib as a first-line therapy of metastatic non-small cell cancer with ALK positivity. There was one important thing was there, which Ankit also said, that the rates of toxicity were similar for both serotinib and chemotherapy, but the percentage of dose adjustments were higher for serotinib because of the higher rate of GI toxicity and liver enzyme elevations. So as you can see in this diagram, that both the diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting were higher in the serotinib as compared to chemotherapy. So what they did another study, that was ASCENT 8, and in which they said that initially the dose was 750 milligram BD on a empty stomach. They studied that if we take with this low fat diet, then 450 milligram is equivalent to 750 mg BD dose, just like abiraterone in CA prostate. And now the recommended dose is 450 milligram of serotinib with food instead of 750 mg BD empty stomach, and it produces the same effect, and it is devoid of the GI side effects and diarrhea. So we have discussed serotinib and crizotinib both have poor vein penetration, and 46% and 42% of the patients of crizotinib and serotinib, their first site of progression is in the brain. And patient already who are having brain metastasis, these are not the good drug to start if patient has no cost issues. And how is alectinib different from crizotinib? It's a second generation as compared to first generation. So obviously it has a greater potency. It works against more mutation as compared to crizotinib, and it has a better CNS penetration. And as Rushabh discussed, there are four good trials emphasizing the importance and the better result of alectinib in first-line treatment of ALK-positive NSCLC. These are AFP001, JP trial, GLX trial, LX trial, and ELISIA trial. LX trial he has discussed in detail. And there was better PFS as compared to crizotinib, and 3-year PFS, 4-year PFS was better as compared to crizotinib. Similarly, brain penetration was there, and patient had good CNS activity of alectinib as compared to crizotinib. 5-year OS, yes, what Rishabh discussed, that though there was very high difference in the PFS, but the OS difference was not much there. So practically cost effectiveness combination, whether to go with crizotinib and alectinib first line, will always be there, and cost effectiveness has always to be considered in mind before prescribing alectinib and crizotinib. And if you see the side effect profile, crizotinib side effect profile is very good, and there are no more side effects as compared to crizotinib, and visual impairment there are very less, and rest of the side effects are more or less same. Some GI side effects, some rashes, and maybe have some cardiovascular. You have to see for QT prolongation, bradycardia, but not much as compared to other drugs. So the same slide which Rushabh also shared, that it is the drug which is showing the longest median PFS of any ALK TK1 trial in phase 3 trial, 34.8 months in first line setting, effectively protects against and treats CNS metastasis. Only ALK TK to have demonstrated clinically meaningful benefit in OS versus crizotinib, and it is well tolerated and a well characterized manageable side effect profile maintained with long-term use. Like we are very confident with imatinib versus dasatinib and nilotinib. Same, the long-term side effect profile of any drug which can be used for 3-4 years should always be a very good long-term profile, so that we are confident of using that drug for long duration. So a few slides about lorlatinib. So lorlatinib is a third generation ALK TK, and it is a third generation, so obviously it will be more potent as compared to first and second generation. Initially, it was approved for the second line after the alectinib and other second generation TKs, and it acts against many mutations, particularly G1202R mutation, which develops after alectinib, and many other mutations which the second generation TKs developed after long use. So it was a phase 2 study B7461001 on which it was approved in a second line after treatment with 1 or greater than 1 ALK inhibitor, and median follow-up of approximately 7 months post-crizotinib. Objective response rate was 73%, and if other second generation TKs was used, then response rate was 40%. And median PFS after crizotinib was 11.1 months versus 6.9 months if second generation TK was used. So as Ankit said, so the side effects were high and were different as compared to other TKs. It was hypercholesteremia, hypertriglyceridemia, edema, peripheral neuropathy, and cognitive deficits in 1% of the patients. And as expected, there are studies of first-line lorlatinib versus crizotinib in advanced ALK-positive lung cancer. It is a Crown study, and interim evaluation. Obviously, it has a better results as compared to crizotinib because it's a third generation drug. And point to be noted that if intracranial disease is there, then lorlatinib shows very good response. But alectinib also shows good response. So we have drug alectinib available. Then for CNS, I don't think lorlatinib should be used in first line if we have alectinib available with us. So for that point can be taken care of. And lot of side effects: hypercholesteremia, hypertriglyceridemia, increased weight, peripheral neuropathy, cognitive effects, anemia, hypertension, hyperlipidemia were with lorlatinib, which were not with the alectinib and other TKs. And I also find in this study comparative efficacy of first-line ceritinib and crizotinib in advanced NSCLC. And they said there is, in absence of head-to-head trials, this study indirectly compared PFS and OS between ceritinib and crizotinib. And they found that ceritinib was associated with significantly prolonged PFS compared to crizotinib as first-line treatment of ALK-positive. So as all our panelists agree that if crizotinib and ceritinib both have same cost, so most of us will go with ceritinib. NCCN, as usual, they have put all the drugs as a category 1. It is up to you. You can choose any one. But what we have discussed that if practically if cost is not an issue, then go with alectinib. And if cost is an issue, then go with ceritinib if available. And lorlatinib, though it is recommended as a category 1 for first line, I will like to keep it for second line. This slide was also shown by Rushabh. Various combinations, various permutations, and till date, I think the last permutation combination seems to be the best. First line alectinib followed by lorlatinib. Because if you go with crizotinib first and then alectinib in second line, the second line we can see the crizotinib average median PFS is 10 months, and if in the second line alectinib in the ALLUME study that showed more 10 months, so it was around 20 months. Crizotinib followed by alectinib, and if you go with alectinib first, then it is 34.8 months. So if cost is not an issue, then go with alectinib, and I think Roche people, they will further reduce the price. Then it will be more beneficial for all of us to start the drug alectinib in many of the patients. So is there time remaining?
Yeah, we have 2 minutes.
Okay, so dose of crizotinib, ceritinib, and alectinib. Dr. Hani, are you here? Rushabh? Okay, so time is less. I will say crizotinib. You know, we all know 250 mg BD with or without food. Ceritinib it is 450 OD with the breakfast. Alectinib is 600 mg BD, and lorlatinib is 100 mg OD with or without food. And side effects of crizotinib and alectinib and ceritinib all are same except some more ocular side effects with the crizotinib. And we have to monitor heart rate. We have to see for bradycardias. We have to see for occasionally QTC prolongation. Once in every 3 months, we can get an ECG. Though they are not very hepatotoxic and renal toxic, but we have to keep a watch. And pulmonary toxicity, as with all other EGFR TKs associated, but practically very less amount of pulmonary toxicity seen. And take-home message is try to find out targets if clinically not correlating situations. Try to see which method was used first, and if FISH was used, we can always go for a IHC or a NGS to reconfirm if it is a strongly favorable group of the patient. Given a choice, alectinib would be my first best choice. If not, ceritinib will be my second best after alectinib. For CNS disease, alectinib is best option, and at present, lorlatinib should be reserved for second line. Yes, sorry, last line available here. I was of the product. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rahul, which is such an informative panel discussion, and I think there is many things has been covered. This point, one or two points I just want to highlight here, because very less discussion on the resistant mutation, which is very common in the L-tyrosine kinase. So 1 or 2 points here. if the patient is presenting with some kind of the resistant mutation, how will tackle that? So that's the one thing, because you have been little touch on that. And as we know, the first line after uses of the crizotinib, the incidence of mutation is around 20%. And but if you use a second generation TKI, the incidence of mutation ranges from 50 to 60%. So, the lorlatinib is one of the most potent drug, but one of the major things which we have discussed is the side effect profile, especially hypercholesterolemia and hyperlipidemia. Even there's a mood changes and some other topics like GI and skin. So I think this is the right message at this moment. The lorlatinib should be used as of now for the second line. But this is one of the major drug, and I think some of the patients that with the tyrosine kinase domain, especially a G1202R, which is one of the most potent mutation, resistant mutation, where this is effective. But I think alectinib is one of the safe and should be preferred as a first-line treatment for this category of the patient. And if the patient is having developed a resistant mutation, because nowadays the data is coming of doing a repeat biopsy after using this, the first-line use of any of the ALK inhibitor, whether it is crizotinib or alectinib, and because your treatment is going to be tailored not only in the base of the prior treatment you have used, but of course the kind of your biopsy results, and that is to be there, just like we are doing a biopsy for our breast cancer patient, checking the ERP or HER2 again. The important point is here, after a progression of the first line ALK inhibitor, the subsequent biopsy will tell us whether this patient having the subsequent resistant mutation or not, because not only in the resistant mutation, there is a change of the biology also. There's a change in the, I would say, the transition to the mesenchymal transition also noted in around 10% of the patient. There are the patients where there is the change in the bypass mechanism. There are the patients that they found EGFR positive patient or MET positive patient, even HER2. So that is reported. So in around 20 to 30% of the patient, you can get a different kind of the histopathology. Even you can get a small cell, some 5% of the patient. So that has been definitely there. So I think this is one of the common thing which we need to do, and especially if the patient is in progress with the first line ALK inhibitor, I think the subsequent biopsy will tell us you're tailoring the subsequent line of treatment. With this, I thanks to Rahul and all the panelists for their active participation. And now we need to move on to the second session that would be on the extensive stage small cell lung cancer. And I'm going to invite our first speaker, Dr. Pinaki Mohto, is going to speak about the role of atezolizumab in the management of extensive stage small cell lung cancer. Over to you, Dr. Pinaki, for your.
Good evening, sir. So should I share my screen or will the organizers share it? Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you can go. You can share.
So is my screen visible, sir?
It's coming. Yeah, you can go.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, thanks to the organizers and Ashish sir for inviting me to give a lecture on Tecentriq, the role of Tecentriq in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. So I'll just be covering these things: the disease background, incidence, treatment guidelines, options, and what are the recent developments. So we know that small cell is a fast-growing tumor with a high mitotic rate. We have limited options in the good response to the initial chemotherapy, but most patients will progress within a short span of time, and we have limited line of options in the second line. Early metastasis, most of the patients will have distant metastasis at diagnosis. Mean age is 65 years, and patients will have a acute history of tumor-related symptoms like chest pain, jaundice, fatigue, weight loss. So multi-system involvement is quite common. Most of these patients will be smokers, only 2% are non-smokers, and no targeted therapies unfortunately have shown substantial clinical activity. So around 15% of all lung cancers are small cell lung cancers. The 5-year survivals are less than 10%, very dismal. We might have certain subtypes where is a combination of small cell with non-small cell lung cancer, but again, very rare. We do not see these commonly in our practice. Staging, still we follow the veterans staging, that is extensive versus limited. So limited is disease which can be treated with a single radiation field, and involves the nodes as well: ipsilateral, contralateral, mediastinal, ipsilateral hilar, ipsilateral supraclavicular, or ipsilateral effusions. While extensive stage is not confined to the area that can be treated with a single radiation field, the metastatic disease. Again, most of the patients will present in the extensive stage small cell lung cancer. So 2/3 of these patients present with extensive stage lung cancer. And though it is recommended that we should now move to the TNM staging, but still more practical way of classification is still the veterans one, and we are still using it. So in India, incidence again is more. We have more of, the incidence of extensive is around 74% versus 26%. Treatment obviously depends upon the stage. So limited stage, very few patients we have surgery if they don't have nodes, or we give chemotherapy and combine it with radiation, or just chemotherapy and then follow it up with radiation. Or extensive stage, we go for chemotherapy. As still now it was like that. PCI, again, the role of PCI is debatable. So we have to decide on an individual case-to-case basis whether to give PCI. So in the past 15 to 20 years, not much progress was made beyond chemo and radiation. These are the different molecules that were introduced, but most of these molecules came in the 90s and the early 2000s. But for a very long time, there was no really path-breaking treatment available. That is until the advent of immunotherapy protocols. We started with Nivo-IP, Nivolumab, Pembrolizumab, and then finally went to the PD-L1 inhibitors, Atezolizumab and Durvalumab. So in India also, it's a systemic disease, mostly extensive stage. We give combined modality, chemotherapy, radiation, whether sequentially or one after the other. The standard therapy being cisplatin or carboplatin plus etoposide. 70% of the patients will receive a platinum etoposide, 22% receive iron and platinum chemotherapy. So there is unmet need. Even in the West, we can see on the left-hand side, the 5-year OS rates are 11, and it has not much improved in from the 80s decade to the 2000 decade. So similar thing we can see in India also. The very dismal 5-year survival rate only 2%. So it's a disease where much improvement is definitely needed. And they respond well to the chemotherapy. That is how we tell our patients that most of these patients will respond excellently to chemotherapy, but majority of them will progress within a period of around 6 months to 1 year. So coming to the latest developments, the topic that I've been given is to talk about the role of Atezolizumab, the PD-L1 inhibitor. So this was a pivotal IMpower 133 trial that this was published in June 2018. So this is basically the combination, how PD-L1 basically inhibits immune activation and how it prevents the killing of cancer cells. Before Atezolizumab, there was a seminal trial of Pembrolizumab, the Keynote 604 trial, where they found that the progression-free survival was significantly improved by giving Pembrolizumab. The overall survival was also improved. We can see that on the left side, the hazard ratio is actually for overall survival is 0.80. That means that there was a 20% benefit. However, the p-value was 0.0164, and there was a predefined limit for significance, and it slightly missed it basically. So it was predefined significance threshold was 0.0128, but the actual value came as 0.0164. So it is not that Pembrolizumab did not benefit these patients. Durable responses we see in almost 20% of these patients, but because the pre-specified significance threshold was not met, that's why this did not come in the guidelines. Coming to IMpower 133, as I said, giving chemotherapy with immunotherapy is to create a more favorable environment to maximize the potential of the immune system to eliminate cancer. This is the trial protocol where Atezolizumab was combined with carboplatin etoposide, no cisplatin here, only for 4 cycles. This was compared with placebo plus carboplatin for 4 cycles, followed by maintenance. There was no crossover, so Atezolizumab maintenance compared with placebo until progressive disease or loss of clinical benefit. The primary endpoint was the progression-free survival and the overall survival. The secondary endpoints are the overall response rate, duration of response in the 6 and 12-month PFS rates, 12 and 24-month OS rate, and time to disease progression, patient-related factors, and safety. Radiation, PCI was permitted in these. 44 patients in this trial received PCI. The safety. So again, PCI in the other trial, you see that PCI was not permitted, but here it was permitted in few patients. Consolidative thoracic radiotherapy was not permitted in this trial. It was given for 4 cycles. Now, usually in small cell lung cancer, sometimes we give 4 cycles, sometimes we give 6 cycles. Now, it is shown in the different meta-analysis that giving 4 or 6 cycles, the PFS and the OS is the same. So they decided to give 4 cycles of combination chemoimmunotherapy, and this was followed by the maintenance Atezolizumab. So coming to the primary and the secondary endpoints, the baseline characteristics, I think, were well balanced between the two, whether in the form of the age, the smoking status, the performance status, presence of brain mets, liver metastasis, and the lesion size. So all these are fairly balanced between the two arms. If you come to the 1-year overall survival, it was 51%, 51.7% versus 38.2%. So the median overall survival was 12.3 months versus 10.3 months. So it looks like a difference of only 2 months, but definitely the curves started separating after 6 months, and this separation was maintained. So the hazard ratio was around 0.70, which means almost a 30% benefit was there in the overall survival after 1 year. And the significantly prolonged progression-free survival was seen, but the hazard ratio was 0.77, 5.2 months versus 4.3 months. The overall response rate was almost similar, because we know that most of the patients will respond initially to chemotherapy as well. So we cannot read much in the initial overall response, but actually the survival is the one point which actually makes a difference between the two. The response rates were quite good on all, both arms. And in ESMO 2019, updated OS was published, where at 18 months, it was found that 34% was the survival in the atezolizumab arm versus 21% in the placebo arm. The hazard ratio was 0.76. So the separation between the curves was still maintained at 18 months, 34% versus 21%. The updated overall response rate, again, I think it was still significant, but I think with future and with further time, probably this response, I mean, the response rates initially that were there, were maintained, but with time, probably it will fall in favor of the atezolizumab arm. The patients who had ongoing response, almost 9% patients in the atezolizumab arm were still responding versus only 2.3% in the placebo arm. So this is where the difference lies, that the almost 9% of patients were still responding after 1.5 years. If you look at the subgroups, this was the updated OS published in the subgroups. All the subsets, basically, they responded better in the atezolizumab. The only problem was this, where in brain metastasis, we can see that it crosses the line of no significance. So we are not sure whether in patients who have brain metastasis, atezolizumab was better than the placebo. However, the number of patients were only 35. So I think still this needs further clarification, that whether we should use or not in these patients. There was also an updated biomarker analysis. Unfortunately, only 34% of the patients they underwent this biomarker. They did PD-L1 by IHC biomarker on Ventana platform, and most of the slide sections were actually, I mean, they did it on the sections which were less than 1 year old, and they also did the TMB. So there was a overlap between these two subsets as well. And what they found is that whether the PD-L1 was less than 1% or it was more than 1%, more than 5%, the overall survival actually did not differ. In fact, we can see that patients who had a lower PD-L1 actually did better. If you look at the progression-free survival, depending upon the PD-L1 status, also we can see that it does not really make a difference whether the PD-L1 was less than 1% or more than 1%. The response was almost similar. Here, the overall survival updated depending upon the PD-L1 expression. I think it tells the same story. In fact, patients who have a PD-L1 expression less than 1%, the response was slightly better. Safety summary, almost 40% of the patients had immune-related adverse events, and withdrawal was seen in almost 11% of patients versus 3% in the placebo arm. And adverse impacts, events of special interest, I think not much. It is what we routinely see with immunotherapy. Almost 6% of the patients had grade 3 to 4 immune-related adverse events. So updated safety profile. So ultimately, the median dose exposure was similar of carboplatin and etoposide, 67.7% versus 63% grade 3 or 4 adverse events, 38.9 versus 35.2% serious adverse events. Again, these are comparable between the two arms, and 11.6% discontinuation versus 2.6%. So summary, this basically led to an improvement in the progression-free survival, also led to an improvement in the overall survival at even 18 months, and there was a delta. That means a difference of almost 13% in survival in the two arms. So this is a very landmark trial. This was actually the first trial we demonstrated that the overall survival is improved by 13% by addition of immunotherapy. We also did a further analysis of the PD-L1 in the TMB status, and they found that it was not influencing the overall outcome. So we cannot stratify patients on the basis of PD-L1 and TMB, whether to give immunotherapy or not. The other seminal trial, that was the Caspian trial, which basically used durvalumab to chemotherapy. We can see on the right hand side, the durvalumab, we have got 2-year data now. But if you look at the 18 months data, it is almost comparable between the atezolizumab arm or the durvalumab arm. Numerically, it is 34 versus 21. On the right side, it is 32 versus 24. So I think both of them are equally efficacious in this setting. Looking at the keynote trial, as I said, it responded, but the pre-specified threshold of significance was slightly higher, so they did not include it in the guidelines. And the last one was the EA5161. This was basically a phase 2 trial where they added nivolumab, and they've also found an excellent response. But because it was a phase 2 trial, it was not adequately powered, so still we cannot draw any conclusions on this basis. If you look at all the 4 trials comparison, basically, the another one is Caspian, durvalumab, tremelimumab subset. You can see that the overall survival is quite good. I mean, in fact, IM power 133 showing the best overall survival, followed by the EA5161. And the PFS also, I think, is good with the IM power 133 and the Caspian one. So if you look at the numerical values of the median OS, it is 12 to 10 to 12 months basically with all the different subsets basically. So even though in the durvalumab trial, the objective response was maintained, and even at we can say at 24 months, 13% of patients were still responding versus 3.9% in the placebo. And if you look at the Caspian subsets, basically subgroup OS analysis, we can see that even here I would like to say that even in the brain and the CNS metastasis, if you look at the overall subset analysis, you can see that the line is crossing the unity. So even in these patients also, overall group, the presence of CNS metastasis showed that durvalumab did not really have a very significant difference, but I will just come to that later. The immune-related adverse events were 20%. We remember that in the iron power 33, it was 40%. So here there were lesser immune-related adverse events. This was another difference that, as I said, untreated brain metastases were included in the Caspian. PCI was not allowed, and they also allowed 6 cycles. They also allowed cisplatin. So this was more reflective of the real-world practice, where often we give 6 cycles, and this is what more reflective of the real-world practice. And this was another poster that was published in ASCO 2020, where they have said that OS based on the baseline brain metastasis. So there is a confusion because the initial forest plot is not showing the benefit, but in the patients who had baseline brain metastasis, it was seen that the median overall survival was statistically different. It was 12 versus 8.8 months. So OS with brain metastasis, still in these patients, durvalumab was slightly better. So if you look at the guidelines are basically recommending both atezolizumab plus CP versus plus carbohydrate and durvalumab plus cisplatin or tauglitazide. Both of them are category 1 indications. And subsequent systemic therapies, they have recommended other chemotherapeutic drugs as well as immunotherapy, but they are mentioning that if immunotherapy was used previously, you should not use subsequent immunotherapy. So both nivolumab and pembrolizumab monotherapies have been approved for third line and beyond treatment, but they were studied in patients who had not yet received immunotherapy with chemotherapy. So ICI monotherapy is not recommended for those patients who have progressed, and there is no clear long-term benefit to adding ipilimumab, nivolumab. This again is not there, and despite some hints at the possible biomarkers, none have shown consistent predictive potential in patients, and none we are using routinely in clinical practice. So ultimately, depending upon the extensive stage small cell lung cancer, if you have brain metastasis, again, brain metastasis, if they are symptomatic, we always give radiation first. If they are asymptomatic, again, there is a debate whether to give radiation first or not. Generally, most of us, I think, don't prefer to give it. If they are asymptomatic, we give systemic therapy, and then we follow it up with whole brain radiation and thoracic radiation if there is minimal extrathoracic disease. Definitely adding immunotherapy, whether it be atezolizumab or durvalumab, makes a difference to the survival and definitely should be a part of the standard treatment in today's day and age. Thank you so much. I think the cost also is important because atezolizumab, the cost is if we can give atezolizumab every 4 weekly also. The cost, I think Roche has further reduced the cost of atezolizumab. Now they are giving 1+2 for all cycles. So the average cost per cycle will, if you give 1,200 mg, the cost comes out to around 1.3 lakhs. Whereas for durvalumab, the cost per cycle is around 2.8 lakhs. And even if you give 4 weekly atezolizumab maintenance, the cost will come out to around 1.8 lakhs, which is, I think, 1 lakh less than durvalumab. So cost-wise, again, in a cost-constrained practice like us, definitely atezolizumab is a good alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinaki, for the nice summary in the first-line management of atezolizumab in extensive-stage small cell lung cancer. I think we all must agree in last 20 years, there is nothing has been given a significant advantage over this combination of platinum plus etoposide, and adding the immunotherapy in the treatment, whether it is a durvalumab or atezolizumab, has definitely given significant benefit to overall survival in this category of the patient, and which is long awaited. And I think we need to discuss further in our panel discussion. So I'm going to invite Dr. Chintan Shah for the panel discussion of extensive small cell lung cancer. My panelists is Dr. Kaushal Patel, Dr. Nirali Trivedi, Dr. Priyanka, Dr. Aditi, Dr. Iktawala. Over to you, Dr. Chintan.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Kaushal sir, for giving me this opportunity. And thanks to Pinaki as well for making my job easier. He nicely summarized most of the things which we are going to discuss quickly in the next 20 minutes. Are all the panelists on board? Dr. Kaushal bhai,
Yes.
Dr. Ekta, I'm able to see. Dr. Aditi, I'm able to see. Yes, Kaushal, I'm able to see you now. Dr. Nirali, I'm able to see. Yes, fine. So Dr. Priyanka, she's there?
I think Priyanka is not there.
Yeah, Priyanka, I'm not able to see. Fine. Okay, so we are having 4 people in the panel. So without wasting time, I would start with the case. My slides are visible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So there's a 54-year-old man with no comorbidities, presented with facial swelling, facial erythema and dyspnea for 4 weeks. History of cough with blood in sputum. He had a personal history of smoking since last 25 years, and the pack year was 50 packs a year. On clinical examination, his vitals were normal. He had a facial plethora, neck swelling, purple discoloration of face, and prominent external jugular vein. So this was the X-ray, which was typically showing as golden sign, suggesting some hilar mass. So what would you do next, Dr. Kaushal? Kaushal bhai. So what you prefer doing in this patient? You have this scenario, X-ray. Now you would go with the CT or a PET CT?
I preferably go with the PET CT and biopsy.
Okay. PET CT followed by biopsy. Fine. Dr. Nirali?
I would go with the CT thorax and a biopsy.
Okay. So we will do only CT thorax. Okay. Is there anything else you would add? Abdomen? Most of the time CT thorax, when we advise, upper abdomen is included.
Yes, but yeah, I will include CT thorax plus abdomen. And then after that, the investigations would be according to the biopsy report.
Okay. Fine. So 1 for PET, 1 for CT. Dr. Aditi?
I will probably go for PET CT scan.
Directly PET CT. Okay. And Dr. Ekta? Dr. Ekta is there?
Yes, in the CT thorax with upper abdominal cuts.
Okay.
And biopsy.
Okay. So we have equal weightage, 2 for CT and 2 for PET CT. So all of us are right. So right. So even the NCCN guidelines says a good CT chest with abdomen pelvis is sufficient enough. But a PET CT is to be considered, especially if you are dealing with a limited stage. So either way, you are right, going for a CT thorax, including the upper abdomen, or going for a PET CT. So PET CT is not must, just more relevant for many a times patient has already got a CT done and is reaching us. So there, where a good quality CT scan, where upper abdominal cuts, especially liver and adrenals are included, we can avoid a repeat PET CT scan. So PET is not mandatory, except we are dealing with a limited stage. So this was a CT image. As you can see, the CT scan was showing the upper mediastinum revealed a large mass with some pressure effect and encasement of the superior vena cava. On the visual upper abdomen cuts, there were some liver metastasis detected, and even the left adrenal gland was showing metastasis. The biopsy was done, bronchoscopy guided, which was showing small cell lung cancer. So it was T4N2M1 disease at the end. So my another question will be, would you like to do an MRI in this patient? So if yes, then why? If no, then why? We'll go the reverse way. Dr. Ekta first.
Yes, MRI brain routinely in all extensive stage, because the decision for PCI versus WBRD will depend on day one brain.
This is asymptomatic patient, not having any CNS CNS symptoms.
If day one MRI brain is normal, then we can add PCI later on.
Okay. If day one MRI is abnormal, then you will go for whole brain RT first.
Not first, but at least will not give PCI.
Okay. Fine. Dr. Aditi?
I usually do for staging of if the MRI is positive, then I would like to at a later stage see if I have given chemotherapy, and after 3 cycles I would like to see the progression, if at all it's an asymptomatic progression, to consider radiation earlier for that reason, just to see the progression, even if it's asymptomatic.
For the purpose of progression and to monitor, more importantly, to monitor the CNS disease when you are starting with upfront chemotherapy, right?
Yeah.
Fine. Dr. Nirali, you have the same say. You want to have, you have some other opinion about this?
I will do MRI brain, but not because the patient is symptomatic. It will not be guiding my immediate treatment course for later. I will use. Yeah.
Okay. Kaushal bhai?
Yeah, I would definitely go for the MRI brain in this patient, but due to SVC, I wonder if MRI is possible or not, because it requires some 45 minutes to find positions in MRI. But anyways, if the patient's GC is good enough, then I would like to go with the MRI brain for the staging.
Right, right. So most importantly, as most of you said, it is most importantly for the staging. And anybody can have a rough guess on what is the incidence of asymptomatic brain mets. Anybody wants to answer this? Rough guess.
Approximately 15 to 20%.
Right, you are very close to that. So it was in this study, it was found that it was found in 13%. So somewhere around what you said, nearly 15%. The only issue is, as we know that systemic therapy, the response rate to systemic disease is 73%. While the CNS response to our chemo or chemo plus IO, this was mainly for the chemotherapy trials, analysis for the chemo drugs. So it is around 27% only. So as Dr. Aditi and all of you rightly mentioned, that you need to monitor it once asymptomatic brain mets are detected, and you may need to add radiation earlier for the brain if you find that your CNS disease is worsening. Right. So as you all of you rightly said that your decision will not change, and this is the evidence for that. There is something called green journal. We have a red journal for radiation oncology. There is also a green journal in radiation oncology, where they asked the European experts to vote for this scenario. So most of them said the same. In asymptomatic patients, chemotherapy alone was the first choice, but those who are symptomatic, they would go for whole brain radiation first. But still, if you read the third point, there was significant variation in this decision making. Because of the majority voting going in this favor, they came to this final conclusion. Coming to staging part, what would be the preferred method of staging for small cell lung cancer? Would you use TNM, Veterans Affairs, or both? And where would you consider TNM staging specially? As Dr. Pinaki has already discussed in his talk, that for small cell, most of the time we are using Veterans Affairs staging, where it classifies into localized versus extensive disease. So what is the relevance of TNM staging in small cell? Dr. Kaushal Bhai?
Yeah, I generally routinely use this one, extensive stage versus localized stage. This is in my routine practice. Yeah. We can use TNM staging to a certain extent when the disease is localized, and we can go for the surgical or radiation therapy as a curative intent. So in that particular aspect, we can use particularly the nodal status is very much important in that aspect to decide.
Correct, correct, very true. So I think my slides are not moving. Okay, yeah. Fine. So this is exactly what you said rightly. For T1, T2, you have a surgical intervention. So this is, if you classify first by Veteran Affairs and you find extensive stage, then there is no need of TNM. But if you are finding limited stage, then you need to categorize whether it is T1, T2, N0, or it is T3, T4, or a node positive disease. Because for T1, T2, N0, surgical intervention will be there, while for T3, T4, or node positive, concurrent chemo radiation will be treatment of choice. There is where the TNM comes into play. So this patient, as you know, was having SVC syndrome because of the extensive stage small cell lung cancer. What will you prefer first? Go for a local radiation for that, or you start with systemic therapy? Dr. Ekta?
Chindan, if the symptoms are not immediately life-threatening, then we can start with the chemotherapy.
Right.
And local RT can be avoided in small cell lung cancer.
Right. Dr. Aditi, Dr. Priyanka, Kaushal Bhai, you all agree with this, or you have a different opinion?
Yeah, I agree. Systemic therapy would be the first if the patient is stable. And as from the clinical history, the patient seems to be stable from his vital data. So we can go with the systemic therapy.
Perfect, perfect. So as we all know that small cell is both a highly chemosensitive and a highly radiosensitive disease. And as we all you all rightly said that patient is stable vitally, is fine. Systemic therapy is going to work equally well for the SVC. In addition, it will cover the systemic disease also, which the radiation will not be able to. So again, the preference is on systemic therapy in such scenarios, and that should be the choice which everybody conquered. So this patient, we are planning now. So we have staged this patient. We have decided we'll go with systemic therapy. So what will be the first choice in this patient? First line treatment, Dr. Nirali, what will you choose among all the 5 options available? EP, with cisplatin or carboplatin or any of the IO, Atezo plus carbo plus Eto or a Durva based EP?
After hearing to all the talks, definitely atezolizumab with the carbo-Eto.
Okay.
Whatever may be the practical use, but theoretically atezolizumab with carbo-Eto.
Okay. Why not Durva plus carbo-Eto?
See, Durva also has got a good response. If it would have been a brain metastasis, probably I would have preferred durvalumab. But since, as we discussed, that atezolizumab, the cost is now much, affordable compared to durvalumab, we will definitely try to offer that to the patient.
Right. Any different opinion from my esteemed panelists, or everybody agrees with this option number 3?
Yeah, we agree definitely. Any of the options from 3, 4, and 5 would be enough.
Correct.
If the patient is having no brain mets.
Right.
If the patient is having a brain mets or something which is contraindicated for the cisplatin, then we can have a choice according to the problems. But I am fine with any of the IO, either atezolizumab or durvalumab, because if we are talking about the cost, then once we complete with the chemotherapy, we will give atezolizumab at every 21 days, while durvalumab at 28
every
days.
4
so
weeks.
At the end of the day, the cost would be almost similar.
Almost the
if
same.
we are calculating the maintenance therapy cost. So and while talking with the scientific sessions, the cost is not an issue. But any of the IO
3 or 4, I think 3, 4 or 5.
But
right.
Yes, but definitely, if the patient is affordable, then we can go with the IO plus chemo combination in 2021 era.
Correct. Fine. Absolutely agree. And these are the salient features. These were covered already by Pinaki. So I will quickly go through this. I want to discuss in detail. So do you really think that flexibility of platinum is an advantage, that is which the Caspian did, allowed both cisplatin as well as carboplatin? So in today's era, do you think that cisplatin is still a better agent than carboplatin, Dr. Aditi?
No, I think carboplatin is equally effective.
Okay. Anybody feels still there are, I have seen many people still who are fond of using cisplatin and still they believe that
for extensive stage.
Yeah, for extensive stage or for any lung cancer, cisplatin is a better agent than carboplatin. So anybody has this view, or anybody thinks any reason for that?
No, in fact, we are using carboplatin more in our practice than cisplatin, even though in perfect patient.
Right.
So the flexibility of the platin does not make any difference in our routine practice.
Correct.
Because so I think don't have any.
Doesn't matter, right?
Debate.
So rather on the contrary, I always say the carboplatin is a better agent, because efficacy wise it's the same, but toxicity is very much less and very much manageable.
Yeah,
so
easy to handle.
Yes. When would you prefer cisplatin and not use carboplatin? Any particular scenario where you would switch to cisplatin and discontinue carboplatin?
Patient is diabetic, maybe sometimes, because it's okay if we give in saline, but still that is.
Okay.
There are the 2 reasons where we can omit the carboplatin. The one is there is a hypersensitivity reaction. There is little bit more compared
with
to
carboplatin. Absolutely.
And second thing, there is a significant bone marrow depressions which are more common with the carboplatin compared to the cisplatin. So these are the 2 things where we can use cisplatin instead of the carbo.
Perfectly. I totally agree. Anybody wants to add to this? Fine. So we'll move on to this. And this was analysis which says the same, that cisplatin is no better. Definitely, it is more harmful in terms of the toxicity. Coming to the next question, do everybody still prefers and gives 6 cycles of EP in our clinical practice, or somebody goes for 4 and feels that 4 is as good as 6? We'll start with Dr. Nirali first.
Usually we give 4, but if the patient is responding well and there is residual disease, and if patient is not affording immunotherapy and it's tolerating quite well, we can give 2 more.
Fine, perfect. I think everybody agrees to it, right? So this was the analysis that says that 4 is no better than 6. The eventual PFS as well as OS remains the same, whether you give 4 cycles or whether you give 6 cycles. But as Dr. Nirali rightly said, that in today's era, although IO is available, it is not affordable for everyone. And somebody who has got very good response, we would tempted to add 2 more cycles of EP in this scenario. And this is just a repetition of what Dr. Pinaki highlighted, that this untreated brain mets were excluded in the ATIZO trial, while cisplatin was allowed, up to 6 cycles were allowed in the Caspian trial, and PCI was excluded in the Caspian trial, which was allowed in the IMpower 133. Coming to the 2-year survival, as you all are aware that the 2-year survival, if you see the Kaplan-Meier curves, the upper one is for durvalumab from the Caspian trial, and the lower one is IMpower 133 for ATIZO. The curve starts separating quite early, so you can see somewhere around 6 months, close to 6 months. While here the curves are separating somewhere around 7 to 8 months. So more or less it is similar. The time of separation is similar. Even if you see the 2-year survival, it is 22 versus 14. Here is also 22 versus 16%. So more or less, this is again a cross-trial comparison, but 2 years, the number of people surviving are almost the same. Pinaki has already shown the 1.5, 18-month survival, which was similar. And even now the curves for 2-year survival are also similar. The hazard ratio is also similar, 0.75, and here it is 0.6. So nearly 24-25% reduction in the risk of mortality by adding either of these IO agents. And as this was discussed, both are category 1 recommendation in the NCCN guideline. So what's the role of PCI in this patient? Suppose this patient undergoes 4 cycles of EP plus any of the IO. Patient was initially not having any brain mets. MRI was normal, undergoes 4 cycles of EP plus ATIZO or durvalumab. So any role of PCI in such patients?
Yeah, in today's era, if we are using IO along with the chemotherapy, then I think there is no role of the PCI.
Right, right. Anybody wants to add or change, have a different opinion on this? So most of you agree with this, right? What Kaushal Bhai said. Absolutely agree. Suppose this patient was not affording for any of the IO, he took only EP. Then would your statement remain the same or will it change?
Yeah, if the patient has a response, complete response, then definitely we can go with the PCI. But at the end of the day, how much the PCI has advantage over the survival or prevention of the brain mets is questionable, even though in absence of the IO. But still, as a sake of guideline, we can continue with the PCI in the responding disease.
Dr. Ekta, Dr. Aditi, and Dr. Nirali, you all agree with this, or you want to, somebody is having opinion that she will not do PCI and would just observe the patient on MRI? Is this a possibility if patient has only taken EP, not taken any IO?
If PS is good, age is less than 75, we can go for PCI if patient is not taking immunotherapy.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Aditi, you were trying to say something?
Yeah, for extensive stage, now we have evidence that PCI or MRI surveillance are equivalent.
Both are options, correct.
So for this stage, if chemotherapy alone is given, MRI surveillance is good enough.
Good enough, fine, fine. So role of local radiation to the residual primary. Anybody would go, patient had an excellent response to the liver mets disappeared, adrenal met was not seen. There was a small 20-30% residual disease seen in the hilar region. So would like to add local radiation in such scenario, or we will still continue with only maintenance ATIZO or Durval? That patient had received IO. There are 2 scenarios. One is patient had received IO, other is patient has not received IO.
In either of the cases, I would not like to go for the local radiation therapy.
You will not like to go. Okay.
No.
Anybody wants to go for?
If not received IO, I would probably give
local
therapeutic RT. Yeah.
Right. Anybody else wants to add? Or Dr.
If not received IO, I would also like to give if patient has responded well to chemo.
Fine. Dr. Ekta?
Because it has a proven survival advantage if the disease has responded.
So there is some data. There is some data to support this, and this is from the Dutch CREST trial that consolidating RT for low volume residual thoracic disease with a very good response in extra thoracic region has some advantage in terms of 6 months as well as 2-year survival. So 2-year survival also improved. And this was, again, these are data in the patients who have received only chemotherapy. These are older data, so there's no data available for the IO era. But as everybody rightly said, that IO is received, we will continue just with the IO. But if IO is not there, only EP has been given, then all of us will be tempted to add radiation based on this Dutch CREST trial, where 30 grain 10 fraction was given in such patients, and 2-year survival was definitely better in those patients who received RT versus in those who did not receive RT. And for PCI, again, there are two contradictory data. One is from the EORTC trial, which showed that there was definite improved overall survival when PCI was added. But there was simultaneously a Japanese randomized trial, which found that there was no survival benefit over doing an MRI surveillance and giving radiation at the time of the time when the patient developed brain metastasis. So either way, surveillance imaging for brain metastasis or PCI, both the options are true in today's era, especially if the patient is not going for IO. And for IO patients, as we know, Durva has a good CNS penetration. I'm not sure about Atezo, but we need to ask the anybody who can comment on this, whether there is some data for CNS penetration of Atezo, and it's a subset analysis which has been come out of the trial. Mostly IOs have a weak but definitely small CNS penetration in the CNS penetration. So as we discussed this, does brain metastasis change your treatment? Everybody was in favor of Durva based on the robust data we have, because Durva was showing, this slide was already seen, and Durva was showing median OS benefit in nearly 3 months with a hazard ratio of 0.69 in patients who have got brain mets. So you will be tempted to use durvalumab, especially in such patients who have got brain mets, because we have proven data that yes, Durva does improve OS in those patients who have brain metastasis. Response rate, this slide was again discussed, is both are almost in the range of 60-65%. And should all patients of extensive stage receive IO chemo regime in this era? Yes, because more than 20% patients are surviving with this combination even at 2 years, which was a dream a few years back with the use of chemotherapy alone. So thank you and happy monsoon to all of you. I started quite late, but I tried to finish on time.
Dr. Pinaki, can I ask a question?
Yes, Pinaki, tell me.
So this talk is about immunotherapy, but apart from immunotherapy, in your practice, do you give chemo maintenance in these patients? You know that it is not a part of the standard practice.
Correct.
But this being a worse disease than non-small, and when I searched the literature, I could not find any good quality studies that really showed that your immunity is detrimental.
Right.
So do you or do you not? I'm just interested in this.
No. I even searched for this. I had a patient of small cell esophagus, and even there was some weak data of using etoposide maintenance. She was young, 31-year-old lady. And I was tempted because we all know, as you rightly said, it's going to come back very soon. And it was an extensive disease with liver, pancreatic, bone mets. I hardly remember any organ where mets were not there. And she had a near CR after 6 cycles of EP. And this was the case where after 4 cycles, there was some residual disease, and I did 2 more cycles and completed 6 cycles. And kept her on oral etoposide. And that time I searched, there was some weak retrospective data where etoposide maintenance was having some doubtful benefit. I just gave it because she was 31-year-old. There's no rationality to it, and there is no good scientific data to support. And most of the time for 60-70-year-old patient, I don't do it.
Yeah.
Anything from your side? You raised a very valid question. So have you ever come across or have you tried
the
in this?
evidence that I found was from 1998. It's quite old. The other thing is that most of our patients, if they're in a good performance status, I definitely am quite skeptical of keeping them on observation, especially in small cell. Even if you give immunotherapy, you're giving maintenance immunotherapy, right? So you're giving something.
We are talking about when IO is not given, just EP
yeah.
is given.
I'm just saying that I personally feel that some kind of maintenance should go on in lung. If you cannot give Eto or Carbo, something like a Taxane or something. So I have like few patients who I have given 10 cycles of Taxane post Carbo-Eto, and they are still doing well. So sometimes I personally feel that I don't have any data supporting my this thing, but this is my personal view.
Dr. Pinaki, 1 second, if you don't mind, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I was so happy to discuss this because, as you said, even there is no data. It is not, a good feeling to keep our patients without any therapy who are doing well post chemo, not on immunotherapy. Honestly, I have used just simple tablet etoposide for a number of months in my patients, and they do very well just with nothing but tablet etoposide.
So you do it in all patients. I have tried in one patient, just because she was quite young, but within 6 months, I think she had brain metastasis. She came up with brain mets.
Agreed. Yeah. So
I don't know. I have experience in only one patient.
The patient will not be fit for any kind of treatment, most probably.
Yeah.
I think Pinaki, this is one of the very practical question in our day-to-day practice. And the small cell cancer patient, the way they responded very well, and the performance has been improved a lot. And after completion of the cycle of chemotherapy, I think those patients who is not a candidate immunotherapy, actually they maintain their performance very short period of time. So 6 months they do well, and after that within a few months they come there very rapidly. But unfortunately, if you see the data, even the 4 to 6 cycle, additional 2 more cycle, even 6 or 8 cycle, there is no survival advantage, and that has been proven in the study. So giving a maintenance treatment as of now, it is experimental, though medical oncologists doing their practice, that is the individual call. But as of now, we can say we don't have a strong data to support on that. So that's why the immunotherapy comes into the picture, and now we have a better molecule, especially for those patients who can afford. And I think this is one of the best data as of now in last 2 decades, where there is a survival advantage over the cisplatin and etoposide or carboplatin etoposide with addition of this immunotherapy. So with this, I thanks to everyone, especially Dr. Chintan for nice moderation and discuss all the practical issues, all the eminent panelists who participate in this panel. And I think we are already crossed our time. So with this, I hand over to Amit for their final comments. Thanks for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ashish Kaushal, and thanks to all the speakers and esteemed panelists for the wonderful session. Though it was mentioned very clearly during the discussion that costs should not be a part of the scientific discussion, but we as a Roche as an organization has taken a very bold step in terms of making this very useful immunotherapy drugs to more cost effective. And in this journey of lung cancer patients, we have taken a step of improving our patient support programs with respect to Tecentriq as well as Alecensa. And Alecensa now, with one paid box, the 2 free boxes will be given, and this is throughout now. The monthly cost of treatment comes to around 1.5 lakhs. And similarly, we have taken an improved step in terms of Tecentriq, reducing the further cost to the patients by more than 33%. And now on 1 paid vial and the plus two free vials was the earlier patient support program. And now this we have extended to 1 paid vial plus 2 free vials throughout till the time patient will progress. And this makes one of the most cost-effective immunotherapy across all the lung cancer indications, and making this as for a monthly cost of treatment somewhere around 1.3 lakhs for 1 single dose. So that's a small initiative and a step which we have taken. So we just wanted to highlight in front of all the esteemed faculty members. And as we all are aware that the driver mutation plays a very, very key important role in identifying the actionable, for treating the patients further progression on the immunotherapy. So we as an organization are offering this complementary FMI test, which is a very high level of diagnostic test in terms of gene sequencing and identifying the driver mutation. And this is also been offered as from the organization free of cost to the patients who are put on Tecentriq as well as Alecensa, and they start progressing on those the therapy. So these are the 2 major offerings from we as an organization, and had taken up steps in terms of reducing the cost of treatment. And with this, we wish you once again a rest of the evening, and thank you so much once again to all the esteemed panelists and faculty members for putting this entire program very well informative. And thanks to once again Dr. Ashish Kaushal sir for all the guidance and maneuvering the entire program so well, and making the discussion very fruitful for everyone. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
and
you.
Good night to everybody.
Thanks. Yeah. Bye.